Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked around at his new home. The Kepler Academic Institute was huge. The buildings were made of strange, glowing materials that seemed to shift colors in the light. Purple trees swayed in the knee. Gentle breeze, and the air smelled like flowers he had never seen before. This was Serenity Prime, one of the most peaceful worlds in the galaxy. Jake was the first human ever accepted into the advanced xenobiology program here. His heart was beating fast with excitement and worry. He had worked so hard to get here, and now he needed to prove that humans belonged among the other smart species of the galaxy. Jake pulled his heavy bag over his shoulder and walked toward the dormitory building. Students of all different species moved around the campus. Some floated in the air like jellyfish. Others looked like walking crystals that caught the light and threw rainbows everywhere. A few had tentacles instead of arms and moved by sliding across the ground. Jake felt very out of place. He was just a regular human with 2 arms, 2 legs, and skin that did not glow or change colors. His black hair was cut short, and his brown eyes took in everything around him. He was tall for a human, but seemed small compared to some of the other students. The dormitory was called Harmony Hall. Jake found his room number and pressed his hand against the door scanner. The door opened with a soft musical sound. Inside, the room was split into 2 sides. One side had a normal bed and desk that looked like it was made for humans. The other side had something that looked like a pile of soft crystals arranged in a pattern. "You must be Jake," said a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Jake turned around and saw his roommate for the first time. Zilph was about as tall as Jake, but made entirely of clear blue crystals. Light moved through his body in slow waves, and his voice came from somewhere inside his crystal structure. "Yes, that's me," Jake said, setting down his bag. "Nice to meet you, Zilph." "I have read about humans," Zilph said. The crystals that made up his head tilted to one side. "Your species is very new to space travel. Only 50 years since first contact." "That's right," Jake said. "We're still learning about everything out here." Other students began to arrive. On their floor, Vera floated through the wall like a ghost. She was made of purple gas that swirled and moved in patterns. Her voice sounded like a whisper that came from everywhere at once. "Welcome to Harmony Hall," she said to Jake. "I am Vera from the ethereal reaches. We are so excited to have a human here." Crix slid down the hallway on a trail of slime. He looked like a giant slug, but had 4 arms and big, kind eyes. His skin was green and always looked wet. "Jake, right?" Crix asked. "I'm Crix from the Garden Worlds. I've never seen a human before. You look just like in the pictures." Jake smiled. "Thanks. You all seem really nice." The next morning, Jake went to his first class. The orientation was held in a huge room with seats that could adjust for any type of student. Professor Quell stood at the front of the room. She had 8 long tentacles that moved like snakes and a round head with 6 eyes. Her skin was a soft yellow color. "Welcome, students, to the Kepler Academic Institute," Professor Quell said. Her voice was calm and soothing. "This is the most important school in the galaxy. Here we learn about life in all its forms." Jake looked around at the other students. There were so many different types of beings. Some breathed air like him, while others seemed to absorb light or energy directly. A few students were so alien that Jake could not even figure out which end was their head. "Now," Professor Quell continued, "we must talk about wellness. Your mental health is very important. To us, the stress of learning can be hard on young minds." She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared in the air. It showed different rooms and devices. "We have many ways to help you relax," she said. "Meditation pods that play peaceful sounds, harmony chambers that balance your energy, nature rooms where you can sit with plants and small, gentle animals. Jake nodded along with the other students. This all seemed normal enough. It is very important that you avoid any activities that cause stress, Professor Quell said. Her tentacles moved in patterns that Jake's translation device told him meant serious warning. Some species can be hurt by too much excitement or fear. We have had students become very sick from stress. What kind of activities should we avoid? Asked a student who looked like a walking flower. Anything that raises your heart rate too much, Professor Quell said. Loud noises, bright lights, sudden movements, or anything that might seem dangerous. Even pretend danger can cause some species to have panic attacks. Jake felt a small worry in his stomach. On Earth, he had always dealt with stress by going to the gym or running combat simulations. Those activities helped him think clearly and feel better. But it sounded like those things might not be allowed here. If you feel stressed, Professor Quell continued, please come to the Wellness Center immediately. We have trained staff who can help you find the right relaxation method for your species. After class, Jake walked back to his dorm with Zilth, the crystal being moved with a soft musical sound as his parts shifted against each other. What do you do when you feel worried? Zilth asked. Back on Earth, I usually go work out, Jake said. Or I run training programs on my holographic system. Training programs? Zilth's light patterns changed to show confusion. What kind of training? Just basic stuff, Jake said. Combat simulations, survival scenarios, things like that. They help me focus and feel better. Zilth stopped walking. His crystals turned a deeper blue color. Combat? He asked. You mean fighting? Well, yeah, Jake said. Not real fighting. Just simulations. It's pretty normal for humans. Zilth's crystals were now almost black. That sounds terrifying. Jake realized he might have said something wrong. It's not scary at all. It's actually very relaxing. But Zilth just stood there, his crystals getting darker. Jake decided to change the subject. That evening, Jake sat in his room doing homework. The material was interesting, but very different from what he had studied on Earth. Everything here focused on peaceful cooperation and gentle harmony. There were no studies about competition, conflict, or survival under pressure. As the night went on, Jake began to feel homesick. He missed his family, his friends, and his old life. The stress of being in a new place with new people was getting to him. He needed to relax and clear his head. Jake looked at his roommate. Zilth was resting in his crystal bed, his light patterns slow and peaceful. Jake decided to wait until Zilth was fully asleep before he started his normal relaxation routine. He had brought his portable holographic training system from Earth. It was a small device that could create realistic combat scenarios. Jake had used it every night for years to help him unwind and sleep better. Jake waited until he was sure Zilth was sleeping, then quietly set up his equipment. He put on his headphones and started his favorite training program. Soon, he would be ready to face another day at the academy. But Jake had no idea that his idea of relaxation was about to cause the biggest crisis in the school's history. Jake put on his headphones and started the holographic training system. The small device projected a realistic battlefield around him. Enemy soldiers appeared from behind cover, their weapons ready. Jake smiled as he grabbed his simulated rifle and took aim. This was exactly what he needed. The familiar weight of the weapon in his hands, the quick thinking required to survive, the rush of adrenaline that made everything else fade away. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake felt truly relaxed. He rolled behind a concrete barrier as enemy fire lit up the air around him. The sounds of explosions and gunfire filled his headphones. Jake's training kicked in and he moved with practiced skill through the simulation. Duck, aim, fire, move. Duck, aim, fire, move. Jake had been running these programs since he was 16. His father had taught him that physical and mental challenges helped humans stay sharp and calm. When Jake felt worried or upset, 30 minutes of combat simulation always made him feel better. The enemy soldiers in the program were tough. They moved fast and shot accurately. Jake had to use all his skills to stay alive. He threw a grenade around a corner and heard the explosion. 3 enemies down. He sprinted to new cover as bullets flew past his head. Jake was having fun now. This particular program was one of his favorites because it was so challenging. The enemy AI was smart and worked together. Jake had to be smarter and faster to win. His heart rate was up, his muscles were tense, and his mind was completely focused. This was perfect relaxation. Meanwhile, Zilth was not sleeping as deeply as Jake thought. The crystal being did not need as much rest as humans, and he often stayed aware of his surroundings, even while resting. When Jake started moving around the room, Zilth's consciousness began to return. At first, Zilth heard nothing unusual. Jake was being quiet, and his headphones blocked most sound. But then Zilth began to sense vibrations through the floor. Jake was moving quickly and heavily, like he was running or fighting. Zilth's crystals began to brighten as he became more alert. Then he heard something that made his entire body turn cold with fear. Even through the headphones, some sound was escaping. Zilth could hear explosions, gunfire, and what sounded like screaming. Zilth slowly turned his head toward Jake's side of the room. What he saw made every crystal in his body flash with terror. Jake was in the middle of what looked like a real battle. Holographic enemies surrounded him, shooting weapons that looked completely real. Jake had a large rifle in his hands and was firing back at them. His face was focused and intense, and he was moving like a trained killer. But the worst part was that Jake looked happy. He was smiling as he fought. When he took down an enemy, he grinned with satisfaction. When he barely escaped from an explosion, he laughed with joy. To Zilth, it looked like Jake was living out violent fantasies and enjoying every moment of it. The crystal being had never seen anything so frightening in his entire life. Zilth's species had evolved on a world with no predators and no violence. They solved problems by talking and working together. The idea of enjoying combat was completely alien to them. To Zilth, Jake appeared to be having a mental breakdown and acting out dangerous dreams. Zilth tried to move quietly, but his crystals were vibrating with fear. He needed to get help before Jake hurt himself or someone else. Still glowing with terror, Zilth slipped out of the room and into the hallway. The dormitory hallway was quiet. Most students were sleeping or resting in their rooms. Zilth moved as fast as he could toward the emergency communication panel at the end of the hall. His crystal body made soft chiming sounds as he moved, but he tried to stay quiet. Behind him, Jake was still fighting his simulated battle. He had reached the final part of the program, where he had to face multiple enemies at once. Jake rolled under a table as grenades exploded around him. He came up firing and took down 2 enemies with precise shots. Jake wiped sweat from his face and grinned. This was exactly what he had needed. All his worries about fitting in at the academy were gone. His homesickness had faded away. He felt strong, confident, and ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Zilth reached the emergency panel and pressed the button for campus security. A calm voice answered immediately. "Emergency services, how can we help you?" "This is Zilth in Harmony Hall, room 247, he said. His voice was shaking with fear. "My roommate is having some kind of violent episode. He's acting out combat scenarios and seems to be enjoying it." There was a pause on the other end. "Can you repeat that? Did you say combat scenarios?" "Yes," Zilth said. "He has weapons, and is fighting multiple enemies. He's laughing and smiling while doing it. I think he's having a psychological break. Stay away from the room, the voice said. We're sending help immediately. Within minutes, security forces were rushing toward Harmony Hall. The emergency alert went out to all staff members. Dr. Luna Stevens, the head of xenopsychology, was woken up at her home. Dean Morpheus was contacted at his private residence. The security team arrived at the dormitory and began evacuating students from the surrounding rooms. Vera floated out of her room looking confused. Crick slid down the hallway, asking what was happening. There's been an incident, the security chief told them. Please move to the safe zone immediately. More emergency vehicles arrived. Medical teams set up outside the building. Crisis counselors prepared to help any students who might be traumatized by whatever was happening in room 247. Inside the room, Jake was completely unaware of all the activity. He had reached the final boss of his simulation, a heavily armed enemy commander who required perfect timing and strategy to defeat. Jake was in the zone now, completely focused on the challenge. He ducked behind a pillar as the boss fired a rocket at him. The explosion shook the virtual ground. Jake waited for the right moment, then popped out and fired 3 quick shots. The boss staggered but did not fall. Jake smiled. This was going to be a tough fight. Outside, the emergency response was growing larger. Fire trucks arrived in case the building needed to be evacuated. The campus medical center sent its best trauma team. Even Professor Quell was contacted, though she was so frightened by the report that she nearly fainted over the phone. Dr. Stevens arrived and took charge of the situation. She reviewed the reports from Zilth and the security team. A human student, appearing to enjoy combat, was unlike anything in her experience. She had studied many species, but she had never encountered a being who found violence relaxing. Has anyone tried to communicate with him? She asked. We're afraid to get too close, the security chief said. If he's having a violent breakdown, he might be dangerous. Dr. Stevens nodded. She had read about humans in her xenopsychology textbooks, but the information was limited. Humans were so new to galactic society that most species did not understand. Then she activated the building's communication system and spoke into the microphone. Jake Martinez, this is Dr. Stevens from the medical center. We need to talk to you. Please respond. Inside the room, Jake was still wearing his headphones and fighting the boss. He had no idea that anyone was trying to reach him. He had just figured out the boss's weakness and was about to make his final attack. Jake threw a grenade and rolled to the side. The explosion stunned the boss, and Jake fired his last few shots. The enemy commander fell, and the simulation ended. Jake pulled off his headphones and grinned with satisfaction. That was exactly what he had needed. Jake felt completely relaxed and ready for a good night's sleep. He started to pack up his equipment when he heard Dr. Stevens' voice coming from the room's speakers. Jake, please respond if you can hear this. We're here to help you. Jake looked around in confusion. Why was someone calling him? And why did the voice sound so worried? He walked to the window and looked outside. What he saw made his jaw drop. The entire area around the dormitory was filled with emergency vehicles. Lights were flashing. People were running around, and it looked like the whole campus was in crisis mode. Jake opened his door and stepped into the hallway. At the far end, he could see security officers and medical staff waiting behind a barrier. When they saw him, several people pointed and started talking quickly into their communication devices. Jake walked toward them, completely confused about what was happening. As he got closer, he could see that some of the staff members looked frightened. Others looked ready to run. What's going on? Jake asked. Dr. Stevens stepped forward, staying behind the protective barrier. Jake, we need you to stay calm. We're here to help you through this episode. Episode? Jake asked. What episode? I was just relaxing in my room. Several staff members looked at each other in alarm. Dr. Stevens took a careful step forward. Jake, your roommate reported that you were engaged in violent combat scenarios. He said you appeared to be enjoying it. We're concerned about your mental state. Jake looked around at all the emergency responders, then back at Dr. Stevens. Slowly, he began to understand what had happened. Oh no, he said softly. I think there's been a big misunderstanding. Dean Morpheus arrived at the scene 15 minutes later. He was a tall, thin being with pale blue skin and large, gentle eyes. His species, the contemplatives, were known for their wisdom and peaceful nature. They had not experienced violence. In over 10,000 years, the dean looked at the emergency response and shook his head. In his 300 years at the academy, he had never seen anything like this. Security forces were set up in defensive positions. Medical teams were ready to treat trauma victims. The entire situation looked like preparation for a war. What exactly is the situation? Dean Morpheus asked Dr. Stevens. We have a human student who appears to have suffered a psychological breakdown, she replied. He was observed engaging in detailed combat fantasies with multiple opponents. His roommate reported that he seemed to be enjoying the violence. Dean Morpheus felt his stomach turn. The idea of enjoying violence was so alien to his species that it made him feel sick. Where is the student now? He's right there, Dr. Stevens pointed to Jake, who was standing near the barrier, looking confused and worried. Jake tried to approach the dean, but several security officers stepped forward to block him. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jake said. I wasn't having any kind of breakdown. I was just doing my normal relaxation routine. Dean Morpheus stared at Jake in shock. You consider violence to be relaxing? Well, it wasn't real violence, Jake said. It was just a simulation, like a video game. But you were fighting and killing opponents, Dr. Stevens said. Your roommate said you were smiling and laughing while doing it. Jake nodded. Yeah, it was fun. It's a challenging program that requires skill and strategy. I've been doing it for years. Several staff members stepped backward when Jake said this. Professor Quell, who had just arrived, made a small fainting sound and had to be supported by two colleagues. You have been engaging in violence for years? Dean Morpheus asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Combat simulations, Jake corrected. They're very popular on Earth. Most humans do some form of combat training or simulation. This statement caused a wave of panic among the gathered staff. The idea that an entire species regularly engaged in combat training was terrifying to them. Dr. Stevens quickly activated her communication device to contact the Galactic Council. This is a Code 7 situation, she said into the device. We need immediate consultation with the Interspecies Relations Committee. Jake was becoming frustrated. Look, I don't understand what the big deal is. I was just running a training program in my room. It's completely normal. Normal? Dean Morpheus repeated. You consider mock combat to be normal? For humans, yes, Jake said. It helps us stay sharp and deal with stress. When I'm worried or upset, 30 minutes of simulation makes me feel much better. Dr. Stevens was taking notes rapidly. Jake, when you say it makes you feel better, what exactly do you mean? It relaxes me, Jake explained. The physical activity releases endorphins. The mental challenge helps me focus. When I'm done, I feel calm and ready to sleep. The medical team exchanged worried looks. Dr. Stevens had studied many species, but she had never encountered anything like this. Most beings found conflict stressful and harmful to their health. The idea that combat could be relaxing was completely outside her experience. Jake, she said carefully, most species become very stressed by conflict. Fighting raises their heart rate, causes anxiety, and can lead to serious health problems. How is it possible that combat relaxes you? I don't know, Jake said. It's just how humans are built, I guess. We evolved on a dangerous world where we had to fight to survive. Maybe that's why combat feels natural to us. Dean Morpheus had to sit down. The mention of fighting to survive was almost too much for him to process. His species had evolved in perfect harmony with their environment. They had never faced predators or had to compete for resources. Your entire species evolved through combat? He asked weakly. Well, not exactly, Jake said. But Earth is a dangerous place. We had to deal with predators, natural disasters, diseases, and competition for food and territory. Humans who could handle stress and conflict were more likely to survive and have children. Professor Quell made another fainting sound. Several other staff members were looking pale and shaky. Dr. Stevens realized that this was much bigger than a simple medical issue. Jake, I need to ask you some questions about human psychology. When you engage in these combat simulations, what happens to your body? My heart rate goes up, my muscles tense, and I get an adrenaline rush, Jake said. But afterward, I feel really good, relaxed and happy. And other humans experience this same response? Sure, Jake said. Some humans prefer sports, others like video games, and some do martial arts or military training. But we all have ways of dealing with stress that involve some kind of challenge or competition. Dr. Stevens turned to her colleagues. We need to contact Earth immediately. This could be a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature. Dean Morpheus was trying to process what he was hearing. You're saying that humans require stress and conflict to maintain their mental health? I wouldn't say we require it, Jake said. But it helps. When I don't get enough physical and mental challenge, I start to feel anxious and restless. What happens if you try to relax the way other species do? Dr. Stevens asked. Meditation? Peaceful music? Gentle activities? Jake thought about this. Those things are nice, but they don't really help when I'm stressed. If I'm worried about something, sitting quietly just gives me more time to think about it. I need something that occupies my mind and body completely. The communication device buzzed, and Dr. Stevens answered it. Dr. Stevens here. This is Commander Lisa Park from the Earth Embassy, came the voice. We've received reports of an incident involving a human student. What's the situation? Dr. Stevens looked at Jake, then at all the emergency responders. We have a human student who has been engaging in combat simulations as a form of relaxation. This has caused significant alarm among our staff and students. There was a pause. Combat simulations? You mean like virtual reality training? Yes, with weapons and multiple opponents. He appears to enjoy the activity. Commander Park sighed. Dr. Stevens, I think we need to have a conversation about human psychology. What you're describing is completely normal human behavior. Dean Morpheus leaned toward the communication device. Normal? How can violence be normal? It's not violence. Commander Park said, it's training and recreation. Humans have been doing combat sports and simulations for thousands of years. It's how we stay physically and mentally fit. Dr. Stevens felt like her understanding of the universe was shifting. Are you saying that all humans engage in this type of activity? Not all, but most, Commander Park replied. We have martial arts, competitive sports, video games, military training, and many other forms of simulated conflict. It's a normal part of human culture. Professor Quell had to be helped to a chair. The idea that an entire species considered combat to be recreational was almost too much for her to handle. But why? Dean Morpheus asked. Why would any species voluntarily engage in stressful activities? Because stress makes us stronger, Jake said. When we face challenges, we learn and grow. When we overcome difficulties, we gain confidence. Combat simulations are just a safe way to practice these skills. Dr. Stevens was beginning to understand. So for humans, stress is not just something to endure, it's something you actively seek out? In controlled amounts, yes, Jake said. Too much stress is bad, but too little stress is also bad. We need the right amount of challenge to stay healthy. Commander Park's voice came through the communicator again. Dr. Stevens, I recommend that you allow Jake to demonstrate his training program under controlled conditions. Once you see how it works, you'll understand that it's not dangerous or abnormal. Dean Morpheus looked around at all the emergency responders. This is unprecedented. We've never had a species that finds conflict enjoyable. We don't enjoy real conflict, Jake sighed. We enjoy the challenge and the skill required to overcome obstacles. It's the same feeling you might get from solving a difficult puzzle or learning something new. Dr. Stevens made a decision. Jake, would you be willing to demonstrate your training program for our medical team? We need to understand how this affects human physiology. Jake nodded. Sure, but can we turn off all the alarms first? And maybe explain to everyone that I'm not dangerous? Dean Morpheus looked at the crowd of frightened staff members. I think that's going to take some time. As word spread about the incident, more officials arrived. Representatives from the young Galactic Council, experts in xenopsychology, and even military advisors came to observe. The idea that a species could find combat relaxing was so unusual that it required immediate study. Jake found himself at the center of the biggest diplomatic and scientific event in recent galactic history, all because he had wanted to relax. After a stressful day, the Academy's main auditorium was prepared for the demonstration. Medical monitors were set up to track Jake's vital signs. Security barriers were installed to protect the observers. And for the first time in the Academy's history, combat equipment was brought onto the peaceful campus. Jake stood in the center of the auditorium, surrounded by hundreds of alien scientists and officials. He had never imagined that his simple relax. The main auditorium had been transformed into a research facility. Medical monitors lined the walls, displaying Jake's heart rate, brain activity, stress hormones, and muscle tension. Behind thick protective barriers, hundreds of alien scientists, professors, and officials watched nervously. Dr. Stevens stood at the control panel, her hands shaking slightly. Jake, we're going to monitor your vital signs throughout the demonstration. Please explain what you're doing as you do it. Jake nodded and looked around at all the terrified faces. He had never felt so much pressure in his life. Okay, everyone. I'm going to start with a simple training program. This is what I do every night before bed to help me relax. He activated his holographic system, and the auditorium filled with gasps of alarm. A realistic battlefield appeared around Jake, complete with destroyed buildings, smoke, and the sounds of distant gunfire. Oh my, whispered Dean Morpheus, gripping his chair. It looks so real. Jake picked up his simulated rifle and checked. The weapon. This is just like a video game, he explained. The enemies are computer programs, not real beings. Nobody gets hurt. 3 enemy soldiers appeared from behind cover, their weapons aimed at Jake. The audience screamed in terror, but Jake calmly took aim and fired. The first enemy fell, then the second, then the third. Excellent marksmanship, Jake said with a smile. See how my heart rate is elevated but steady? That's the adrenaline response helping me focus. Dr. Stevens watched the monitors in amazement. Jake's vital signs showed that he was alert and engaged, but not panicked or out of control. His stress hormones were within normal ranges for physical exercise. Jake, she said over the intercom, how do you feel right now? Great, Jake replied, ducking behind a concrete barrier as more enemies appeared. This is exactly what I needed. After a long day, my mind is clear and I'm focused on the task at hand. Professor Quell had been watching from the back of the auditorium. She was still frightened, but she was also fascinated. Dr. Stevens, look at his brain activity patterns. They're similar to what we see during meditation. Dr. Stevens checked the neural monitors. Professor Quell was right. While Jake's brain showed high activity in areas related to focus and coordination, the areas associated with anxiety and stress were actually calmer than normal. Jake, can you explain what you're thinking about right now? Dr. Stevens asked. Jake rolled to new cover and fired at an enemy sniper. I'm thinking about angles of attack, ammunition conservation, and positioning. I'm not worried about school or homesickness or anything else. This activity clears my mind. More enemies appeared, and Jake had to move quickly to avoid their fire. He sprinted across the battlefield, using his training to stay alive. The audience watched in horror, but Jake was clearly enjoying himself. This is fascinating, Dr. Stevens said to her colleagues. His cortisol levels are dropping, indicating reduced stress. His endorphin levels are rising, showing pleasure and satisfaction. Zilf had been watching from the front row, his crystals dim with confusion. I don't understand, he said. How can fighting make someone feel better? Jake heard the question and paused behind his cover. Zilf, think about it this way. You know how you feel better when you solve a difficult math problem? Yes, Zilf replied. This is the same thing, but with physical challenges instead of mental ones. When I overcome obstacles and use my skills successfully, I feel proud and satisfied. Jake demonstrated by taking down 2 enemies with precise shots. See? I identified the problem, enemies in my way. I used my training to solve the problem, accurate shooting and good positioning. Now I feel good about my success. Dean Morpheus was beginning to understand. So this is like a competitive sport for humans? Exactly, Jake said, throwing a grenade around a corner. Humans love competition and challenges. We get satisfaction from testing our abilities and improving our skills. The final wave of enemies appeared, and Jake had to use all his training to survive. He moved with fluid grace, his years of practice showing in every movement. The audience watched in amazement as he demonstrated human physical capabilities. Look at his coordination, Dr. Stevens said. His reflexes are incredibly fast, and his accuracy is perfect. Jake finished the simulation and removed his headphones. His vital signs showed that he was relaxed and content. His stress hormones had returned to normal levels, and his muscle tension had decreased significantly. How do you feel now? Dr. Stevens asked. Perfect, Jake said with a big smile. I feel calm, happy, and ready for a good night's sleep. This is exactly how I feel after every training session. The audience sat in stunned silence. They had expected to see a violent breakdown, but instead they had witnessed what appeared to be a form of active meditation. Commander, Park's voice came through the communication system from the Earth Embassy. Dr. Stevens, what you've just observed is a perfect example of how humans manage stress. We call it positive stress, challenges that make us stronger rather than weaker. Dr. Stevens was reviewing the medical data. The results are remarkable. Jake's stress levels actually decreased during the combat simulation. His brain showed patterns consistent with flow states and deep focus. But why? Asked a professor from the back of the room. Why would evolution create a species that finds conflict relaxing? Jake stepped forward to answer. Because Earth is a dangerous place. Humans who could stay calm during fights were more likely to survive. Over millions of years, we evolved to actually enjoy the mental and physical challenges that our ancestors faced every day. He gestured to the holographic battlefield. This simulation recreates the same challenges, but in a safe environment. It's like practicing for situations we might face in real life. Dean Morpheus was starting to see the logic. So humans use simulated danger to prepare for real danger. That's part of it, Jake said. But it's also just fun. We enjoy testing our skills and seeing how well we can perform under pressure. Dr. Stevens had an idea. Jake, would you be willing to try some of our relaxation techniques? I'm curious to see how your body responds to peaceful activities. Jake agreed, and they set up a meditation pod in the center of the auditorium. Jake lay down in the soft, comfortable chamber as gentle music played and peaceful images were projected. Around him, the audience watched the monitors as Jake tried to relax the alien way. His heart rate stayed normal, but his stress hormones began to rise slightly. His brain activity showed that he was becoming restless. After 10 minutes in the meditation pod, Jake sat up looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but this isn't working. For me, my mind keeps wandering to all the things I'm worried about. Dr. Stevens checked the readings. His stress levels increased during the peaceful meditation. This is the opposite of what we expected. Jake climbed out of the pod. It's not that your relaxation methods are bad. They're just not right for humans. When I sit quietly, I start thinking about everything that's bothering me. But when I'm active and challenged, those worries go away. Professor Quell had been taking notes throughout the demonstration. This suggests that different species have evolved completely different stress responses. What relaxes us actually increases human stress, and what stresses us actually relaxes humans. Commander Park's voice came through the speakers again. That's exactly right, Professor. Human stress physiology is designed for action, not rest. We feel better when we're moving and solving problems. Dean Morpheus stood up slowly. He was beginning to understand something important about the diversity of life in the galaxy. Jake, when you first arrived here, we told you to avoid stressful activities. But for humans, avoiding stress is actually stressful. Yes, sir, Jake said. When I don't get enough physical and mental challenge, I start to feel anxious and restless. I need some kind of regular activity that pushes my limits. Dr. Stevens was fascinated by the implications. This means that our standard wellness protocols might actually be harmful to human students. We've been trying to protect Jake from the very activities that keep him healthy. A professor from the Harmony Collective raised a tentacle. But what about the other students? Jake's combat simulations terrified his roommate. Jake looked embarrassed. I'm really sorry about that. I had no idea that what seems normal to me would be so frightening to other species. I should have asked about cultural differences before starting my training program. Zilf stood up from his seat. His crystals were a brighter blue now, showing curiosity instead of fear. Jake, I understand better now. But could you warn me? Next time? The sounds were very scary. Of course, Jake said. And maybe I can use soundproofing or run the programs when you're not in the room. Dr. Stevens had another idea. What if we created a special wellness program for human students? Something that provides the kind of challenges humans need while keeping other species comfortable? Dean Morpheus nodded. That's an excellent suggestion. We need to develop new protocols that work for all species, not just the peaceful ones. A military advisor who had been observing stepped forward. I'd like to study human combat training methods. They might be useful for our security forces. Jake looked surprised. Really? You want to learn human fighting techniques? Not for violence, the advisor clarified, but for problem solving under pressure. If humans can stay calm during simulated combat, maybe other species can learn similar SK. 3 months after the incident, news of Jake's demonstration had spread throughout the galaxy. Universities, research centers, and governments were all talking about the discovery that different species had completely different stress responses. Some called it the human paradox. The idea that a species could find conflict relaxing. Jake had become famous, but not in the way he had expected. He was invited to speak at conferences, participate in research studies, and help develop new wellness programs. His simple training routine had started a revolution in how the galaxy understood mental health that the Kepler Academic Institute had changed dramatically. The Wellness Center now offered different programs for different species. Peaceful species could still use meditation pods and harmony chambers, but there were also new facilities for more active species. Jake stood in the new Human Wellness Center, looking at the equipment that had been installed. There were combat simulators, sports facilities, competitive gaming areas, and challenge courses. Other universities were copying the design and creating their own multi-species wellness programs. It's hard to believe this all started with you. Trying to relax, said Dr. Stevens, who had become Jake's research partner and friend. Jake smiled. I just wanted to unwind after a difficult day. I never imagined it would cause such a big change. Dr. Stevens had published several papers about human stress physiology and was now considered one of the galaxy's leading experts on the subject. Your species has taught us so much about the diversity of life. We thought we understood stress, but we were only seeing one small part of the picture. The door opened and Zilth entered. His crystal body was bright and cheerful, and he had become one of Jake's closest friends. Behind him came Vera and Crix, along with several other students from different species. Are you ready for today's demonstration? Zilth asked. Jake nodded. Today was special. After months of preparation, he was going to teach the first ever interspecies combat training class. It was completely voluntary, and all safety measures were in place, but several brave students from peaceful species had asked to learn about human-style stress management. They walked to the main auditorium, which had been converted into a training facility. Medical teams were standing by, not because they expected injuries, but because this was still an experimental program. Dean Morpheus was there to observe, along with Professor Quell and dozens of other faculty members. Welcome, everyone, Jake said to the small group of volunteer students. Today we're going to learn about controlled stress training. Remember, this is completely safe, and you can stop at any time. The students included 3 harmonites like Zilth, 2 ethereals like Vera, 1 garden worlder like Crix, and several species that Jake was still learning about. They all looked nervous but curious. First, let's talk about why humans do this kind of training, Jake began. We use controlled challenges to build confidence, improve our skills, and learn to stay calm under pressure. He activated a very simple holographic program, much easier than his usual training. A single slow-moving opponent appeared, armed only with a training weapon that could not cause real harm. Watch how I move, Jake said. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm just solving a problem. The opponent is the problem, and I need to figure out how to stop him safely. Jake moved slowly and carefully, explaining each action. He dodged the opponent's attack, then used a simple takedown move to end the simulation. The watching students applauded nervously. Now, who wants to try? Jake asked. Zilth stepped forward. His crystals were a deep blue color, showing his nervousness. I'll try, but I don't think I can do it. Jake set up an even simpler program, just a practice target that the student needed to hit with a simulated weapon. Start with this. No opponents, no pressure, just aim and fire. Zilth took the training weapon with his crystal hands. It took him several tries to figure out how to hold it properly. When he finally fired and hit the target, his crystals flashed bright with surprise and joy. I did it, he said in amazement. I actually hit the target. How do you feel? Dr. Stevens asked, monitoring Zilth's vital signs. Strange, Zilth replied. Scared, but also proud. I've never felt anything like this before. Other students began to try the simple exercises. Some found them too frightening and stopped immediately. But others discovered that they enjoyed the challenge of learning new skills and testing their abilities. Vera, the ethereal gas being, surprised everyone by being naturally good at strategy simulations. Crix found that his slow, steady nature made him excellent at defensive training. Each species brought their own strengths to the activities. "This is remarkable," Professor Quell said to Dr. Stevens. "Some of these students are actually responding positively to controlled stress." Dr. Stevens nodded. "We're discovering that the capacity for growth through challenge might be more common than we thought. It's not just humans, many species seem to have this ability. They just never had a safe way to explore it." Jake worked with each student individually, adjusting the training to match their abilities and comfort levels. Some wanted to try more complex exercises, while others preferred to stick with simple coordination tasks. "The key," Jake explained, "to the group is to find the right level of challenge. Too easy, and you get bored. Too hard, and you get overwhelmed. But when you find the perfect balance, it feels amazing." A student from the Crystalline Collective raised her hand. "Jake, do you think our species could develop their own combat training programs?" "Absolutely," Jake said. "Combat training doesn't have to look like human combat. Your species could create challenges that match your natural abilities and interests." Dean Morpheus had been watching the entire session with fascination. At the end, he approached Jake. "Young man, I owe you an apology. When this crisis first began, I thought you were dangerous. Now I see that you've brought us a gift." "What kind of gift?" Jake asked. "The gift of understanding ourselves better." The Dean replied, "For too long, we've assumed that all intelligent species were alike. You've shown us that diversity in how we handle stress and challenges might be the key to solving many problems." Professor Quell joined the conversation. "Jake, I've been thinking about applications for this training. What if we could teach species to handle emergency situations better, or help them develop confidence for exploring dangerous areas of space?" Jake's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. Humans have always used training to prepare for real challenges. Maybe other species could benefit from the same approach." Dr. Stevens had been reviewing the data from the session. "The results are encouraging. Several students showed improved confidence and reduced anxiety after completing the exercises. This could revolutionize how we approach mental health treatment." As the weeks continued, Jake's program grew. More students volunteered to try the training. Other universities requested information about starting their own programs. The Galactic Council established a new committee to study interspecies psychology and wellness. Jake found himself working with researchers, military advisors, and government officials. They wanted to understand how human stress management techniques could be adapted for other species and situations. "You know," Zilf said one evening as they sat in their dorm room, "I never expected to become friends with someone who enjoys fighting." Jake laughed. "And I never expected to learn so much about crystal biology and harmonic resonance. That's the best part about this place. We're all teaching each other." Vera floated through the wall to join them. "Jake, I've been practicing those strategy simulations you showed me. I think I'm getting better at making quick decisions under pressure." "That's great," Jake said. "How does it feel?" "Scary but exciting," Vera replied. "I never knew I could enjoy being challenged like that." Crix slid into the room carrying a data pad. "I've been reading about human sports. Did you know that some humans run long distances just for fun?" "Marathons?" Jake said. "Yes, lots of humans enjoy endurance challenges. It's another way we test ourselves and build mental strength." "I think I'd like to try that," Crix said. "My species is naturally slow, but we have excellent endurance. Maybe I could compete in a long-distance event." Jake grinned. "I'll help you train for it." Dr. Stevens visited their room later that evening. "Jake, I have some news. The Galactic University Consortium wants to establish a new degree program in comparative stress psychology. They want you to help design the curriculum. Jake was amazed. Really? They want me to help create a university program? You've become the galaxy's leading expert on human stress management, Dr. Stevens said. And more importantly, you've shown how understanding these differences can bring species together instead of driving them apart. That night, Jake lay in his bed thinking about how much his life had changed. He had come to the academy hoping to prove that humans belonged in galactic society. Instead, he had discovered that the differences between species were not obstacles to overcome, but gifts to be shared. His simple relaxation routine had become a bridge between worlds. By showing other species how humans handled stress, he had opened up new possibilities for cooperation and understanding. And by learning about other species' approaches to wellness, he had grown as a person and as a representative of humanity. Jake smiled as he drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow he would continue his